Hello, hello, fashion peeps. Here we're going to be making a double jet pocket in this trouser that I have. This one is lined. So in this case, I've just done a basting stitch around here where I'm going to do the pocket so that the lining and the pocket can not move around too much. At the back here, underneath the lining, I've already put a little strip of fusing right where I'm going to be stitching in the jets. And the first thing you need to do is come with your ruler from down here and just realign your lines. Now, this fabric is very soft, so it moves around a lot easier. But you can kind of see, if you look at it like that, the more you take in your dart there, the skewer this will become. Of course, this portion here is actually flat. So with this fabric, because it's nice and soft, I was able to get that back to basically flat. But if you're doing your pocket a little bit higher on the dart, which I don't do, but in any event, you would then redraw your line just to make it straight. And even here, you can always just redraw this line just to compensate for that little bit of distortion with the dart. So this is going to be the center of the pocket. My pocket is 12.5 centimeters wide, so I've just put 6.25 on each side of the point of the dart. It doesn't really have to line up with the dart. It's not like a rule written in stone, but I like it to do like that because I feel it's more fashion. So here's my jet. In this case, I've just put a piece of fusing there. If you don't want to do fusing, you must have some stiffening here. So you have to put a silicone or something here. Me, I just put a fusing. And this one end here, I'm just using the selvage because it's fashion. And it says made in Italy, so obviously. But you don't have to do that. You can also just use any piece. We'll just attach it later. And this portion can be really as long as you like. This one I usually do around 10 centimeters. And then from the top, I have 3.5 centimeters to the center of where I'm going to put my lips. And I mark, of course, the same measurement, 12.5. So first I'm just going to pin through the corners because I want to see on the other side where is my pocket going to be. So see, I can see those pins there. Now, this is the same for any pocket, any double jet pocket you're going to do, except that here on a trouser, you're going to have a second pocket bag here at the back. Let me just see. So those two are going to be the top pocket bags. These are going to be the bottoms. So having this pocket bag here, you won't do this, for example, on a suit jacket because the suit jacket has a lining that's going to cover here, so you don't need this portion. And you don't really need this portion even for a trouser, but it is more fashion to have it. So here I'm just checking that I'm more or less exactly over the pocket. So about 2.5 centimeters extra on each side of the pocket. And checking myself straight here that this is lining up straight. And I'll always put it a little bit over the top there, just because with all of the movements, I don't want it to suddenly become too small. And then I'm going to have to be adjusting everything there. So I'm just putting that in place so it doesn't move around too much. Back to the right side. And then I'm going to take this fabric that I'm using for the jets. I'm just going to match up my corner exactly. Match up the corner exactly. And match up the rest of the lines also exactly. So you can, if you want, draw your stitch lines. It will be, I'm now going to stitch exactly 0.5 centimeter above this line and 0.5 centimeter below, so that it's going to be a 1 centimeter seam allowance, or 1 centimeter between the stitch lines. As you know, I'm a cowboy, so I just have the central line marked, and then I'm using the width of my machine foot on the industrial machine as the half a centimeter mark, and that works totally fine for me. And I'm just moving all of this out of the way so that I'll be able to stitch there nice and easily. And then, yeah, we're going to stitch here, reverse, stitch along, reverse, and then same here, reverse, stitch along, reverse. And then on this side, we'll check that our two lines are exactly parallel and ending on the exact same spot over there. So I'm going to go and do all of that. And here we are, back from the iron. I know this is tough to see because it's a navy. But here we've got the two parallel lines, exactly 1 centimeter apart. It actually looks a little bit more, yeah, like 1 1/4. That's totally fine, as long as it's parallel. Yeah, 1 1/4, which is actually totally fine because at the end of the day, 1 centimeter, it's a little bit too fine, ends up fraying out a little bit. So yeah, and you can check that those two edges are lining up super lacquer. So here I'm just going to get rid of all of these pins. And obviously I'm just going to do a quick iron to just settle all that stitching. So then step 1 is going to be, let's keep all of this nice and flat. Okay. So step 1, we're going to work on just this, like the bag lining portion that's right at the back. So if you don't have this, if you're doing this on a jacket, or if you've decided to do another method, don't have this, not a problem. But here, so I'm just slicing that right through the center. I'm going all the way to the edge, maybe like 1 mil past the end. And there on the end, I'm just going to cut it up to the stitching. Yeah. So here, it will help to have a little wooden situation. I'm just going to fold that down. Iron that. So on the underside, I've got one of the forms. You know, it really depends on the fabric. If you want to do this over the word, will also be helpful. Just using a form for now because I feel like it at this moment. Yeah, so basically just opening up that little window. Yeah, so if you're not having this lining, not a drama, you're just skipping this step. There we've got it just open up like that. Then I'm going to this pocket side, right side. I'm going to slice right through just these jets. And this helps to have my center line drawn in there, because this you want to be reasonably in the center. You don't want to deviate too much. And now again, I'm going to just iron that seam allowance down. I'm going to go all the way to the end of the fabric, so we have a nice straight line, one into the other. So all the way down there, all the way down there. Keeping a neat straight line. And the same on the top. Now before I carry on, I'm going to go back to the sewing machine. Just going to, with my fingers, press this lining down and press this down. And just go quickly over, just here where I'm going to cut. Because here, if you've got a seam there, let's say you're doing this on a suit jacket, you're cutting here now. If you don't have a back tack there, it'll start unraveling. Now this one, I'm not really going to cut there, so I don't have to stress too much, but I'm just going to reinforce just that section there, so that if it starts fraying, it's not going to travel up. Then I'm going to come here and just like that, just to kind of lock this in place. And any seam that I'm traveling over, I'll just do that. I'll make sure I lock here, lock here. So I'll go do that, and then we'll be back. All right, back from the machine, and you can see there, I've just done kind of a little just to lock that seam. If I've remembered, then I will just make sure to backstitch far enough up this dart, or if it's a seam like the front side of a jacket, then I'll just have reinforced that portion. But I never remember, and I also do this just to re-secure it, even if I have remembered. So now that's done, I'm going to cut through the trouser or through the jacket or whatever it is that I'm doing. Here I'm cutting through all the layers. You see, because this one had a lining at the back. So I'm cutting through the trouser and the lining. And I'm going to the edge of the pocket, but I'm going to stop maybe 2 centimeters, maybe 1.5 before the edge. And there I'm just going to diagonally cut towards that last stitch, but I'm not going to get all the way there. I'm going to stop maybe 2 mils before the stitch. I do that because if I cut all the way to the edge, it ends up fraying past the edge of the pocket. And so I cut maybe 2 mils to the edge, because then the frays out into the edge. And I'm making sure that I'm not cutting this second pocket bag portion that I have there. Now that's basically that, just cutting to the edge, stopping like 2 centimeters, 1.5, cutting into the corner, but stopping maybe 2 mils from the stitching. Here, once I turn this over, if it is giving me drama, I'll cut a little bit further, but I never do it initially. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a tug just to kind of loosen up those stitches and let it fray all the way into the corner. Then from the wrong side, it's really useful to start by ironing these corners out, these little triangles. And just squeezing that there, it's just going to help everything be nice and neat. So this one, it didn't actually catch the portion of the lining, so I'm going to just redo that. So that I can pull this out. Sometimes if I'm feeling very extra that day, I'll cut out just this lining, I'll cut that away. This lining is so thin that it's really not going to make a drama, but if your lining is maybe a little bit thicker and you feel it's getting too bulky there, then it will really help to just trim that down. Okay. Then we can bring the jet pieces down to the back and just iron the seam open. And the same for the top piece. Bring that through to the back and iron that seam open. So yeah, I'm also checking that those triangles are staying where I want them to stay, not shifting around, finding a new location, because at the end of the day, they need to remain solidly out of the way there in order for this to come out neatly. So that's the ironing done. You can see there our jets are forming slowly. So this next portion I'm going to baste. I'm going to fold that over and baste it. And you see here, because the seam allowance is one up, one down, it's very smooth here. Very, very smooth. Whereas any of the other methods, the seam allowance gets pushed to one side, it ends up making quite a bubble. So I'm going to iron the other one, and then we'll do some hand stitching. All right, so all of that ironing is done. And here on the right side of the pants, shifting this to the wrong side. Did I iron this correctly? Yes, I did. Am I on drugs? What's going on? Yes, I did iron that correctly. So pushing that flap through to the back, and then I can feel with my fingers that the seam allowance is open and that this is folding exactly on the seam allowance. Tuck that portion back, get rid of a little bit of that extra fray. Yeah, and then here I'm going to baste this. Now some people stitch this whole thing by hand from here, from the beginning even, the super hardcore people, and they'll stitch either with or without doing this basting. They'll start stitching in the ditch here by hand. I don't know how I feel about that one. To be honest, I feel this pocket, it gets so much action and out the whole day that the hand stitching is just not going to cut it. I feel that I need a machine stitch there to really give the strength that we need. So here I just based kind of in the middle of this lip or this jet, and just basting around, and then I'll by machine come along on the inside. We're going to look at that in a moment. For now, just basting along, feeling with my fingers that the seam allowance, we've got one up, one down, so that here very smooth, and that my line here is nice and straight. I'm not having one edge of the pocket being super thick and one super skinny or anything like that. So yeah, there's not really too much to it. Here I just stitch twice in one place, because of course this will unpick in a minute. So I don't want to be fighting with myself when the time comes. Yeah, so there's, you see, one jet done. So I like having this pocket bag already in place like this. This is just my style, because it will hide your seam allowance here. Otherwise, without this pocket bag, you have this portion of the seam allowance not really visible unless someone like lifts up, like, oh, look at these seam allowances. But in this case, it's just a little bit better. But of course, like I was saying, if it's a jacket or something like that, then you won't have to do that, because the lining of the jacket will be hiding all of that. So yeah, let's see. I don't feel like those seam allowances are as they should be. Okay. So it's a bit fiddly, but that is, for me, this is the best method of doing a double jetted pocket. Just getting that little triangle out of the way. I'm going to then just stitch twice. So my jets are generally a little bit thicker. If it's thinner, it's more like fine, more luxury, more refined. But I do find if it's too thin, it ends up actually fraying, because then we don't have enough seam allowance between where I've cut and where I've stitched to really hold things in place. So as you see, I do mine just that little smidge thicker than a centimeter, like a centimeter and a quarter, which makes these jets just over 5 mils each, around 6 mils, which is, it's on the thicker side of life, but I'm really one for longevity of the garments. That's my number one concern. I'd rather have it look a little bit more rugged, less refined, and actually last into the next generation, versus more refined and fancy. Let me see what's happened here. So seam allowance has migrated. What is going on here? Okay, well, there we go. Yeah, so basically, I like my things to last. I like my clients to keep coming back, not because they need endless repairs, but because their clothes are lasting super long and they either want more clothes or they want them just modernized for the style, or they want their kids to get things, or whatever. I'm just rambling because I've got to stitch. No, man, what is potting here? Driving myself crazy. Let's just start this one again. Welcome to the world of where you've got to really have your wits about you. I think this is actually supposed to be down. There you go. That was my initial mistake. So good ironing does help. You see here, even though I'd made a mistake, because I'd ironed it properly, the seam kept wanting to flip to the other side. So even though I had begun incorrectly, the fabric was pulling the other way, and I then noticed that because the fabric forced me to notice it. So ironing, I have to say, it's your number one partner in fashion to just get everything to that really crisp, fabulous edge. Yeah, so stitching, stitching, stitching. I don't think I can really say more about these double jets. Yeah, maybe show you while I'm at it. So, you can, if you want, to cut this section just a whole lot longer, and then you can actually flip it up and over, and it becomes your pocket bag and the facing and all of that in one. This case, we're not doing that because it's a little bit more fancy. So we've got a separate pocket bag, separate lining, everything more fancy. But you can definitely do that if you so choose. In that case, you also then wouldn't have that pocket bag there in the beginning when you stitch your two lines through. So there we go. Here we are at the end. I'm just going to stitch twice in one spot. Okay. So you can see quite clearly, there are our jets, our two lips kissing each other. Mwah. So what I'm going to do is flip on this side, lining out the way, and this triangle in these folded lips. I want to catch all of that one time. Now what I like to do is kind of come around here and like back and forth to kind of bring this back together. And this originally was one piece. So if I sew it and I see that now these two are mismatching, obviously I've done something wrong. I cannot sew it like that because this was one piece. It was gouache here. So open your eyes, make sure that that's nice and gouache there, and make sure that you're catching this triangle. This triangle likes, especially if this lining is here, that portion of the triangle likes to pop back there. You catch this little piece of the lining, you come back here. Oh, there's your triangle. No. Keep your triangle this side. There you go. Yeah, so we're going to start like that. We start there. Catch that all together. Then I'm going to stitch along. So I'm going to move that out the way like that. So it's one straight line. I'm going to stitch right in that seam allowance. As you see there, if I stitch, put a pin there. If I stitch there, then it's caught. See that lip there. So it's more or less the same as if I had stitched in that ditch, just that I really don't have energy to do that by hand. And like I say, it's stronger to do it by machine, in my opinion. Then I'm going to stitch that straight, come the side, same story. Make sure the triangle's where you want it. We're not stitching like that or any crazy thing. This, flash, stitch, come back, finish off. And there we'll have the first part of the pocket done, which is the jets. Basting the other portion and then hitting the. So I'm back from the sewing machine. You can see that here I've stitched, kind of pulling those together, and you can see glash, because obviously it was one piece, so it should not miraculously have gotten skew all of a sudden. And then just stitch in that ditch, so you can see the top stitch lines there. So now what I'm going to do is give it an iron. And I can also see from here, I want to make sure that I don't, iron the pants now all of a sudden completely over the pocket like an insane person. I want to iron those lips open. So I'm going to make sure I iron really in that ditch, pushing the lips away from the jets of the pocket. So once you've got a crease there, very difficult to uncrease that crease. So make sure you do it properly the first time. Otherwise, you will have many, many tears in this life and many hours of unpicking. So yeah, there we have it. There's our lips. And you see this much smoother than had all the seam allowance caught up in here. This time there's some seam allowance caught down in here. Half the seam allowance is caught down in there. So, from here, I'm going to now just come on this side. This top portion, you should really secure. It's not all that necessary. I trim this down to 1.5 centimeters from the edge, because sometimes this bag itself is not 100% skewed. So, I mean, as you know, with bespoke, you cut it like this, and then as you go, you trim. So I'm going to trim this down to 1.5 centimeters past the edge of the pocket opening. Take out this basting, and then I'll stitch this portion down to the pocket bag. Now here, because it's the selvage, I can just stitch down, easy peasy. But if you have a raw edge here, either overlock or iron it under. I prefer to iron it under. In my experience with this overlock, it tends to get caught on things like rings or keys. It tends to snag on that overlocking, very annoying. So I'd rather iron it under and stitch down there. In this case, like I say, it's the selvage. I did that because, hello. But yeah, I'm just going to stitch that flat. And then we can also put our buttonhole in here. Or, of course, you can put your little lassie along inside here. I'm doing a buttonhole, so I'm going to do that. But that will all be tomorrow, because today I'm done. Here I am back again. It's actually 2 days later. That's just how it goes sometimes. So you see here, I've just trimmed that back from the edge because we want enough seam allowance here. And this time I stitched, some people call this a satin stitch, where it's like a straight stitch that goes into a zigzag. I find that to be the most, or the least catchy of all the stitches, versus a zigzag, which has, it's going to stitch over like this and then have quite a long thread there that you could catch your finger on or something. And in this case, I've stitched all the way around. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, sometimes I just stitch this, whatever. And because this is now a selvage, I don't have to turn anything. You'll see on the facing, so this one was a raw edge, so I turned that up. And here, I don't know really if you can see that. It's kind of, very dark on dark. But I've stitched just a fun little stitch there all the way around, because this is going to be on the inside of the pocket. You'll see it like this. This is now the facing portion. And obviously I could measure this on the pattern, but I don't. I just take my pocket like that, take my other pocket piece like this, and I see where must my facing come. And I just don't want any of the seams to align. I don't want to put it, for example, like so, where all the seams are landing on one place, because that can create a bit of bulk. So just make sure that that's offset a little bit. And then, of course, this does actually cover the opening of the pocket, so that when you open the pocket, you see that blue at the back there. And then last thing I'm going to do is put my logo here. That's where I usually put my logo for trouser. That's just my vibe. That's how I roll. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll finish up the trousers. Maybe I'll show you this one. I'm doing 2 trousers at once, so I've got 4 of these. And this one I had enough to do with the selvage. So here I didn't have to turn it under. I just stitched it there. Let's see, I really hope you can see that stitch that I did. Fun times. You know, this I just had to recently buy a new machine that has millions of fab stitches that you're absolutely never going to use. So I thought may as well make it fun. So yeah, I'm going to put that, I put it on the right hand side of the trouser, which would be this one, my label. Put it here. Do what you like. Make it fashion. All right, back in a sec. Here I've got my label stitched on, and again using some fancy stitches because why not? And then I'm going to look at my trousers, see which one is on the right hand side. I was just going to turn myself around. This is on the right hand side. So this is where my label is going to be. The other one is just going to be an J one, but they have to match. Okay? And the one thing I must say, when you put the label, just check, line that up, and know that there's a stitch going to come right on top of the top of this jet. So you're going to need to make sure that that stitch doesn't cut your label in half. Very unfashionable. So I'm, making sure that this is now on the right-hand side for me. Now how I do, I'm going to put this just facing like so. Oh, actually, before I do that, I need to put my buttonhole here. So forget everything I just said, buttonhole, and then I'll come back to put the pocket. In this case, I have a lining here. So it's not really going to help me to put any fusing there, but if you don't have this lining, it's a good idea to have some fusing just behind where you put the buttonhole. If I remember, I put that on before I put the lining. If I don't, then you can just stop judging me. For this one, because this fabric is so soft, I'm going to make sure to mark my buttonhole out. So I'm going to have 1 centimeter. My buttonhole is 2 centimeters. So 1 centimeter down from the top of the pocket, like that bottom, the bottom of the lip, 1 centimeter. 2 centimeters for the pocket, or for the buttonhole. And I'm going to just give that a quick baste so that I don't accidentally end up stitching the buttonhole, kind of like that. Something, so it wouldn't be that crazy, but under the machine things can happen. So I'm just going to just stitch around here. Just do a quick base, nothing too exciting. Then we're going to go on that same fancy machine that I bought specifically for the purpose of the buttonholes. I will just do this buttonhole quickly. Then I may as well show you from there what will happen. So yeah, facing the pocket like this, buttonhole will be done. I'll just get my trouser out the way like so. I'll put this right sides together. Here what I'll do is I'll just trim this corner down to around, and then I'll stitch that all the way around with a little bit less than a machine foot, so maybe like 4 mils all the way around. Then we'll give that an iron and drop it on. But let's do one thing at a time. Let's go and do buttonholes. All right, so there I've stitched that, and you see I've rounded the edge there. If you look closely, you'll see it's really maybe 4 mils from the edge that I stitched that. You can, here at the top, stitch it a little bit closer in. I don't do that because you have the whole pants here, so I feel it's going to be a little bit difficult. But now all you're going to do is turn this around. Obviously, you're going to give it a nice iron, and then I top stitch twice on this edge, like how I've done this pocket. Just top stitch twice there on the edge, because I like security. I don't like having a hole in my pocket. Imagine how embarrassing. So a few things here. If you are going to do this buttonhole entirely by hand, you don't have to do it now. I just do it before I put the pocket bag, because this has to be flat on the machine in order for that to enter the machine. And as you know, my trick is to do this quickly by machine, and then I come over it with a blanket stitch by hand to give it that luxury edge, but to save me a bit of time. But if you're doing it entirely by hand, you don't have to do it now. You can wait till the end. And I generally wait till the end before I do the hand stitching, so I'm not even going to open this right now. But of course, if you weren't doing that and have the lassie here, you just insert that and stitch it over here before you put the pocket bag. Or if you were having a flap, if this was for a jacket, you'd insert the flap over there and also stitch it there on the seam allowance. So anyway, now that that's done, this I'm going to iron. And here, there's not really a rule. This is just my thing. I push the seam allowance in to 3 centimeters so that I get a little bit of that shape here, just because I feel it's more fashion to do like that. So I'm going to do that and then just top stitch all of this. Here we are. I've just stitched around there twice just for in case, and narrowed up the top here just for fashion. So the last two things I'm going to do, this is now specifically for a trouser. Of course, you wouldn't need to do this if you're doing a jacket or anything like that. Because I'm just going to stay stitch the top of the pocket bag here. And then I'm going to do bar tacks just in there through all the layers, just to give that a lot of security. Something I forgot to mention also is that here, you're going to flip this down and do a stitch up there so that you can't access the pocket in this way. Again, you don't really need to do that if it's a jacket or anything like that. But one thing I will say is I like the pocket bag to come all the way to the waistband, because otherwise, if this is loose, as you're putting all your cash in your pocket, it tends to pull down and that lip tends to flap up like that. I find this in all the pockets. So whatever pocket I do, I make sure that I somehow secure this. On the inside chest pockets, I put a hand stitch here. On the jacket pockets, I stitch this to the horsehair and to the seam, just so that we have some security holding it up so that it doesn't end up poking its lip out like that. So that's that. I'm going to do that, and then we'll be done. And there we are. Bar tacks are done all the way through. Stay stitch over here. Here, this extra portion, I don't really trim off. I'm just going to let that go into the waistband, not a drama. And then really, really now the last thing I'm going to do is to draw in this D-stitch and stitch that. So the only other thing I can say from here is to, when you're putting the button in, I always like to put a bit of felt at the back of the button just to give it some extra strength. But otherwise, yeah, that's basically that. That's the double jet pockets. This one is specifically for a trouser. And yeah, this D-stitch also depends how dedicated you feel, if you really want to do that. I like to do it because I feel it gives a little bit more security to the sides of this pocket so that they don't end up ripping out in the corners. You can, of course, do this by machine, but I've never been able to get it neat by machine. And of course, doing it like this with a prick stitch is more like a sign of bespoke. So helps people to know why they pay us what they pay. So I'm just going to finish off all of that. I won't make you watch this whole entire long process of doing the D-stitches. But there it is. There is the most fashionable double jetted pocket you ever saw in your life. Some people, I think, call it a Besom pocket. Each to their own. But for me, I feel double jet really describes it quite nicely. And that's that.